Did Jesus die on the cross or did he survive? This is an idea which is completely contrary to mainstream Christian doctrines, the idea that he survived, but we're going to be considering that as an alternative hypothesis. And if true, it has hugely damaging consequences for modern mainstream Christian doctrines, although we will talk about how the fact that that seems to go in line with what Jesus himself said. So that's our topic for discussion today. We're going to be doing that in the context of intelligent design. ID, as it's called, is a very important movement which has an intellectual movement in the West, which has highlighted that you can infer design from the structures in nature. You can look at the DNA and infer that it must have been designed. You can look at physical structures and say, this was clearly designed by a designer who has set things up in a particular way for a particular purpose. And we've often, we've interviewed some of the luminaries of the ID movement. We've enjoyed their work hugely and continue to do so, and think, in my opinion, they produce some of the best work, intellectual work in the West, bar none, basically.
Intellectual work in the world currently, I would say.
In the world, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic stuff. But, we've talked about before how if you apply some of those principles to the crucifixion story, you come out with a very different interpretation to what St. Paul and modern Christians think. Yeah. But actually, this does seem to be very much in line with what Jesus himself said. So we're going to be exploring that topic. And to explore this topic with us, we have Damir Rafi. He is the editor of the Rational Religion blog on our website, rationalreligion.co.uk, and developed this and wrote a fantastic article on it called The Intelligent Design of Jesus' Crucifixion Survival. Damir, peace be upon you. Welcome to the show again.
Thank you for having me.
So why don't you tell us a bit about the article, a bit more about why you wrote it and how it kind of opens.
So it's been Christians that have, in the modern time, they've advanced science quite a lot. But it's quite striking that their personal religious beliefs often don't align with the same rationality and reason as they kind of take to their labs and how they apply modern scientific hypotheses and theories and things like that. So basically this article was looking at the main event, really, the pivotal event in Christian history, and one could say one of the most pivotal events in human history, which is the crucifixion of Jesus, peace be upon him. And Christians believe that he died on the cross and then 3 days later came back to life, and then physically ascended to heaven.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually one of the reasons why lots of people in the West are put off, I don't know what you think, but they're put off science, put off religion, rather, because they see it as irrational, and they see, look, this can't happen in real life now.
Well, a person come back to life.
Person come back to life, yeah. So how is it that we should be expected to believe in that, not just as a fringe belief, but as the most central belief in our worldview?
I mean, I guess Christians will say, well, it's possible because Jesus is God, and therefore he as God died and came back to life. But that itself is not really a solution which is accepted, because that raises many more questions than it answers. How is Jesus God? How does the God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Trinity in one work?
How does God die?
How does God die?
While his creation lives.
Yeah.
And if God dies while his creation lives, then on what basis could one say that the creation is dependent upon the creator?
Lots
of questions in there. And if it is dependent and it still continued to exist, and that means God didn't die, in which case, what was the sacrifice? There's lots of mutual inherent contradictions to it.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, and the explanation is more contradictory than the actual thing itself. And so, it becomes very contradictory. And so this is exploring the question, look, let's use the intelligent design movements, the way that they use science, the way that they formulate scientific beliefs and hypotheses and test them.
Yeah.
And let's use that same method to investigate Jesus' survival or death and see what happened.
Okay, so what is that method of reasoning? It's not something which is unique to ID, but they use it as, because mainstream science uses it, right?
Yes. So the method is called abduction, or it's called inference to the best explanation.
Yeah. And
I guess the concept of it is, look, when you're looking at an event that happened back in time, you can't test it out in the lab with test tubes. You have to basically, you can't, see it happening because it happened in the past. So what you have to do is look at all of the information, both the central pieces and the circumstantial pieces, put everything together and come up with the best explanation, which you can infer from all of the available evidence at the time. Okay. And that's how Darwin, when he was thinking about evolution and other evolutionary kind of scientists, that's how they, used abduction in order to come up with their beliefs themselves. And Stephen Meyer, who's one of the proponents of intelligent design, came up with an analogy, and he said, look, if you have a car in your backyard that you wake up in the morning and it's wet, there's numerous explanations for how it could have been wet. It could have been raining, or it could have been a sprinkler, or someone could have been washing the car. And it's about piecing together the information. So he then says, well, look, if there's some bucket and soap of water and, the driveway's not wet or the road's not wet, then you think, well, it's probably, it's either that there was rain just on that concentrated area of car, or it's that someone was washing the car, which is the most likely thing.
So that becomes the best explanation because what makes something the best explanation in this kind of framework?
I guess it explains all of the available information in one coherent theory.
Yeah, so I guess, that's...
From known causes, I suppose, is a key
and
thing,
causes also, they often say, cause is still in operation.
Still in operation. You can't infer, like, a magical law that used to exist and doesn't exist.
A one-off thing is seen as something...
Yeah.
Something that, which, I mean, you could say is a bit of a weakness of the...
What does it call in, like, in script writing, it's like Ghost in the Machine, isn't it?
Deus Ex Machina.
It's Ghost in the Machine. Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so we're saying that the best explanation are those explanations which explain the gamut of the available evidence, right? So they explain all the things that are relevant and also which don't appeal to special one-off phenomena, which, we want something which we can still see is in operation. We want something which still makes sense, and we don't have to basically say something was miraculous. Miraculous here meaning it was a break in the ordinary law of nature, a break in the way that things go. And I guess it's worth saying, a lot of Christians will say, this was a one-off thing, and there are reasons for this, but we can analyze that. We can say, well, is it more likely that it was this completely one-off situation, which has never been repeated before, never to be repeated, or was it something which is a bit more understandable? And I guess that's where you kind of came in looking at these two hypotheses.
So the first one is that Jesus did in fact die on the cross, and there is some argument for that from the Bible. So, for example, Jesus was on the cross for a good few hours. He was, tortured. He was beaten. He was flogged. Numerous things, and obviously he was in a state where he looked at death's door. He looked unconscious.
Yeah.
And it's documented in the Bible that people, said that he gave up the ghost or he died.
Yeah. So you actually wrote this in the article. So number one, the tomb was empty on Sunday morning. The crucifixion torture was brutal. The Bible says he died. He was pierced in the side, and Jesus was himself God and needed to die, and that this was the plan all along.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I wouldn't say so. That last one is evidence. Jesus was himself God and needed to die, as this was the plan all along.
Yeah, I mean that's
a claim. That's not evidence.
That's the claim. Yeah, that's the claim.
Yeah, so it's not evidence. We must distinguish between claims and evidence. I suppose what you're saying is this is the narrative.
This is the narrative of Christians. Yeah.
So the other narrative, or the other possible explanation, which was pioneered by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, peace be upon him, who was the founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, and he wrote a book called Jesus in India, which documents all of this. But it's quite a profound idea, which is that he survived the crucifixion all along.
Yeah.
And I guess the reason it's profound is because it's a bit unique. Like, even mainstream Muslims today don't believe that. Yeah. And it's possibly the only theory that actually makes sense in the context of science and, without appealing to some kind of supernatural phenomenon or, miracle that could not be possible today, kind of thing.
Yeah, while also appealing to the scripture itself and what Jesus himself said.
So it doesn't require a break in the ordinary, processes of all the laws of the universe. Doesn't require physics to break, and doesn't require everything to kind of come tumbling down.
Yeah, and of reasoning and the way we think about things.
Okay.
So what is that theory?
So survival hypothesis.
The theory is the survival hypothesis, and what that is that Jesus was put on the cross, and he stayed on the cross for a few hours, and he was taken down from the cross, which we know all happened, but that he was unconscious all along, and he wasn't actually dead.
Yeah.
Okay, so when he comes out of the sepulchre 2 days later, or a day and a half later, walking weakly in the shade of a gardener, and then he shows his wounds to doubting Thomas, is actually that he's showing his body post-assassination attempt while he never died.
Not post-assassination attempt.
Yeah, post-assassination attempt.
Yeah.
Right. So those are his wounds from his body that survived the ordeal.
Exactly, yeah.
And one of the things you bring out in the article is that this is actually much more commonplace in the sense of there are plenty of people who are presumed dead who aren't actually dead.
Yeah.
So, this we have this graphic where a man declared dead snores to life right before his autopsy. One of many countless stories in even the modern world about people who are assumed to be dead, but they're actually in deep coma, and then they come back to life.
This was a guy, he was called Gonzalez Montoya or something like that, and he was in a prison cell, and he was declared dead by 3 doctors, and just as he was going to the autopsy, he started snoring. So it's kind of incredible, but obviously it shows that even today, doctors can...
Was he declared dead by
by 3 doctors.
That's bad.
That is bad. That is really bad. There's actually another case which I just remembered. Forgive me, it's the Daily Mail. Pensioner 83 comes back to life 10 hours after she was declared dead and claims her late father was calling me to heaven. Wow. That's one example, but I remember reading an example about this, which was a man, he was declared dead. He was then put in his casket, okay, and only, check this out, only as the mortician was straightening his collar in the suit that he was in, that he felt with the back of his hand a pulse.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And then they got somebody to come along, and that guy was actually alive. And then the photo of the Daily Mail interview with the chap was him sitting in his lounge having a cup of tea 2 weeks later.
Wow. So people can appear dead or can be close to death, but survive. And yet that can, in this case, we can talk about a bit later, how that can still be miraculous in its own sense.
Yeah.
But for now, we're talking about basically the survival hypothesis. So it has this kind of prima facie, this kind of on the face of it, validity. It has a kind of sense of, okay, yeah, I could see that happening. And then we have to compare, is there any other evidence that has more kind of face validity, but is there anything else which makes sense in terms of Jesus' own narrative?
Yeah.
So can you talk to us?
So I think there is, in the sense that before the crucifixion, Jesus, peace be upon him, who was a prophet of God, according to the Muslim belief, and obviously was a central figure in Christian belief, he talked about this future event that would occur, and he talked about the fact that he would be in a state of trial or a state of a struggle. Yeah. And he referred to it as the sign of Jonah.
Okay.
So I think you may have the quote on the screen, but do you want to perhaps read it out? But what the quote essentially says is that Jesus himself said that the biggest sign that would be provided for the people of the time that he was a true man, a true man of God, was that he would be in the same state as the prophet Jonah was. So just as Jonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights, so would he, Jesus, be in the heart of the earth, presumably meaning the tomb, for that period.
Yeah, I mean, there are at least 2 references in Matthew, and I think the top one is maybe the most profound, because he says, a wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign shall be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. So, I mean, this somewhat contradicts other biblical narratives about him, raising all the dead and then coming back to life. That those were surely signs if they were literal. We believe that he brought the spiritually dead back to life. Yeah. But this, this is the major sign which he gives. The sign was the sign. I mean,
it's as I always say, it's an absolute statement through use of an absolute negative with one exception. It's kind of, there's no stronger statement you can make. Yeah. No sign shall be given except.
And what is the sign of Jonah?
Well, I mean, the sign of Jonah is, I think everybody knows the story of Jonah, don't they? A man, the prophet Jonah, he was on a boat, he was thrown into the stormy sea, and he was in a point where he was about to die. The book of Jonah, for example, if you read it, he talks about, it's written about how the weeds were wrapping around his legs and pulling him deeper and deeper into the darkness of the sea, and then all of a sudden a whale comes and eats him. Right?
Swallows him.
Oh, yeah. He swallows him. I think so. He's a very large piece of plankton, perhaps. And the consequence of that is that he actually survives in the belly of the whale for 3 days. And then he's vomited onto shore. Yeah. And he survives and he returns to his people and they accept him. Yeah. So the sign of Jonah, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the founder of the Ahmadiyya community, he in his book Jesus in India, he puts it so well. I mean, he says, if this is the sign of Jonah, what is it? It is the sign of survival against all odds. Yeah. If Jesus died and came back to life, how can the dead be declared similar to the living? Right? If Jesus died and came back to life, then Jesus' sign is the exact opposite of the sign of Jonah.
Yeah.
So,
and therefore he can't be true, because he says the only sign will be the sign of Jonah. If he doesn't fulfill the sign of Jonah, which is survival against the odds, when you should die, you continue to live.
Yeah.
If he actually dies, then he can't be true by Jesus' own words.
Yes, exactly.
So that's a huge issue for Christians, isn't it?
Exactly. In fact, I raised this once an alpha course that I went to.
Oh my God.
There's our guy who goes to courses. You may remember him from the mindfulness course.
That's true, isn't it? It's just a great little, I don't know.
Insight into his character.
Insight, yeah. Quiet, unassuming, gentle, and then devastating.
No, so it's interesting because I think Christians pay no attention to this quote at all. And so I asked them, I said, I kind of raised my hand during the Q&A bit.
Yeah.
And I said, the topic was about Jesus' crucifixion. And I said, well, what about the sign of Jonah? Because he was in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights, but was alive. And so if Jesus had died, there would be no similarity between him and Jonah.
Yeah.
And there was just silence. And then finally somebody said, we've never been asked this question before. So, and that was it.
When I've raised it, it's always, he was in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights. It's like, but that's not the sign. I mean, if I remain indoors for 3 days and 3 nights, I have not demonstrated the sign of Jonah, have I?
Yeah, that wasn't going to be his sign.
And also,
I'm going to pass 3 days and 3 nights in some states. That's just normal life.
Yeah, and the key point here is that actually he also didn't spend 3 days and 3 nights.
Yeah.
He went in on the Friday afternoon. He came back on the Sunday morning.
Yeah.
At absolute best, you could say 3 days and 2 nights. At absolute best.
Yeah.
Right. If you're counting the Friday, even though he went in as the day closed, and therefore from a Jewish calendar perspective, the day ended.
Right.
So I mean,
you can only really reconcile that by saying that, I guess that's the only way you can from the bottom quote. It could be that that has some inaccuracies in terms of what Jesus says, and the top quote is actually maybe the more accurate one, where he doesn't give the time period, but just lays stress on the sign of the Jonah. But the sign of Jonah is the key thing between both of them, right?
The sign is survival. The sign is survival. It's not the time period, and it's not resurrection from the dead. And the key thing I want to emphasize actually is this: there's actually a verse of the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, the second chapter of the Quran, 2 verses, which explicitly tell Muslims to apply this abductive reasoning, which is what it is. I think it's abductive reasoning, isn't it? To the issue of Jesus' death and survival. And I want to share it with you guys. So this is from the translation of Zafrullah Khan, chapter 2, verses 73 and 74. This is addressing the Jewish nation. Okay. And God says, call to mind also when you claim to have brought about the death of a person and then differed among yourselves concerning it, and Allah would bring to light that which you concealed. So he said, test the crucial question by putting together other incidents relating to the affair, and you will arrive at the truth. Thus does Allah plan to preserve alive those considered dead, and shows you his signs that you may understand. I mean, that's an extraordinary verse, because it's talking about the Jews putting a particular person to death and differing as to whether he was alive or dead. And God says, test the crucial question by comparing his case to others who are in a similar situation to him.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
That's the way that God brings the dead to life. This is the true nature of,
And I guess the Jews have their perspective as being, we killed him, and therefore everything post-crucifixion is just fiction and made up.
Yeah.
But that doesn't really account for the fact that he was seen by, the Bible records, I can't remember, was that
500 people.
500 people afterwards.
Yeah.
His disciples are recorded to...
Including St. Paul.
Yeah.
Including St. Paul.
And there's no real doubts that Jesus was seen alive after the crucifixion.
No, there isn't.
So they claim that he was killed. The Christians claim that he died and came back to life. But actually the fact set is that he says, I will survive. Something happens around the crucifixion, and he continues, and then he's seen alive afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the facts simply, I always make a bit of a small joke about this, which is that the best proof that Jesus survived the crucifixion is that he survived the crucifixion.
That he didn't die.
No, because, when you have to have a discussion with somebody saying, well, he died and came back to life, the fact that that's in your toolkit of possible options.
Yeah.
Okay. When actually, if you just apply the normal reasoning and you try to put somebody to death, you see them walking around 3 days later with the wounds from that assassination attempt.
Yeah.
and they say, no, I'm not a ghost. They eat bread and fish with you.
Yeah.
And they say, put your fingers in my wounds. They're that explicit about it. You know, there's no way that you can describe that person as dead and coming back to life. The first port of call is this person survived.
Yeah, why would the question even arise?
Why would the question even arise? The best proof that he survived is the fact that he survived. Is a kind of a quip, but it's true.
Yeah. And even if there was any doubt, if you then look back and his major sign was, I'm going to survive, then it's, again, why does the question even arise? Now,
and I was going to say, that's not even the only thing he said that indicated his survival.
Okay.
So he also talked about his mission, and he said that his mission was essentially to preach to the lost sheep of the house of Israel.
Yeah.
And basically there were 12 tribes from the children of Prophet Jacob, and they kind of spread out throughout the east. And within
the 10, the kingdom of Israel was spread out in the east.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And within the area where Jesus spent those years during his kind of younger life, there were only 2 tribes. So there was the tribe of Judah and part of the tribe of Benjamin, and all of the other tribes were way further east.
And we have some quotes on the screen as well. So Jesus says in John, and other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also must I bring, and they will hear my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. And in Matthew, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So what do you take from that?
Well, it's quite a damning indictment on God forbid, you know,
Right.
if Jesus had actually died on the cross and then come back to life and then gone up to heaven or something of the sort, because it means that Jesus' own mission was unfulfilled, because he said that his mission is to go and preach to the tribes of Israel. And if there were only 2 that he preached to out of 12,
1.5.
1.5. That's like 10% of his mission or something.
Yeah.
So
and the key thing is, he says, "I was not sent except." Again, it's that negative with an exception.
Right. So that clashes with the whole "go to all nations" thing, the Great Commission.
Yeah, well,
elsewhere in the Bible.
Absolutely, because he's saying, in fact, I have not been sent to anybody.
Yeah.
Oh, except the lost sheep of this house of Israel. So that means he's got to address all of the people of Israel. You can't miss out. What's it, 9.5, 10.5?
Yeah. And also, again, to that is the famous incident where he says, where he refuses essentially to give guidance to the woman that comes to him until he does finally, out of sympathy. He says, it's not meet to give the food onto the dogs.
Yeah.
So, that's a famous incident of him saying, I have not been sent to you, but then out of pity, he does give some guidance.
Yes.
But clearly that was an exception to the rule, and the rule he spelt out several times.
Yes.
Yeah, again, with this absolute kind of negative statement. So you're saying...
You were going to say something. Yeah, sorry, I cut you off.
No, I don't know. I think it's also, this whole concept of universal savior or son of God.
Yeah.
Literally, all these things are also refuted just by that quote.
Yeah.
Because Jesus says, look, I've been sent only to a specific group of people to preach to. And the reason is that, again, and in another place he says that, I've not come to abolish the Torah, I've come to fulfill it. So he came as a Jew, as perhaps somebody to revive the Jewish tribes or the Jewish people after they'd become perhaps hard-hearted and started using religion as a business and more materialistic in nature. And so he came for those people and quite clearly specified it.
Okay.
And again, that kind of indicates that he survived and then possibly migrated rather than died and then ascended to heaven.
So the survival hypothesis would again be supported, if on the assumption Jesus is true, it would be supported by the fact that he says that they're going to hear my voice, and that all the tribes are gonna hear him.
Can I just bring this back to the ID hypothesis, ID inference to the best sense explanation process
framework.
Okay, framework. So now we've got the 2 hypotheses we've discussed at length. We've obviously fallen on one side of the argument fairly strongly. So what is the key thing, if we're going to extract the key ID mechanism of inference to the best explanation, what is it that puts the survival hypothesis above the death and resurrection hypothesis?
Well, hold on. I guess so far we've only covered pre-crucifixion information and events.
Okay.
So of the pre-crucifixion stuff, we've talked about that he says he's going to survive. This is going to be his major sign, and that he says that the other tribes of Israel who spread through the east are going to hear his voice. So, given that us and Christians assume that he is true, it's a better explanation that he survived because he would be fulfilling his own promises. And a prophet or a true person, whatever you call him, a true man of God, would fulfill his own signs and his own promises.
Yeah.
So therefore, the survival hypothesis is a better explanation, I think is what we'd say.
Okay.
Now, can you move us more towards, we're actually, let's say we're getting to the crucifixion event. What happens around the time of the crucifixion event? Can you give us, can that shed any light on how to distinguish between the two hypotheses?
I guess so. So on the night before the crucifixion, there's the famous incident where Jesus prays in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he prays with great kind of emotion. And I think it's at that time where he says, "Take this bitter cup of suffering away from me." So again, if his mission was to die and to atone for all the sins of mankind and all these kind of things, it would presumably be quite a happy occasion. It wouldn't be such a cause of suffering. Whereas it's much more reasonable, and again, inference to the best explanation, that obviously he was quite worried, he was quite scared that he was about to be put to death or crucified without having succeeded in his mission.
Right.
And that God ultimately saved him from the crucifixion. So that's one aspect of it.
Okay.
And again, when he's on the cross, he says something similar. So he says, "Oh God, why have you forsaken me?"
Yeah.
Again, thinking that, I might die at this time, and again, my mission wouldn't be fulfilled.
Yeah.
But obviously, God didn't forsake him.
Well, he was actually expecting probably to be saved before he got put on the cross.
I mean,
through some mechanism. And then he's put on the cross, and he's still bearing patience, he's still being steadfast, he's still hoping God will save him. And he gets to a point of extremis almost, where he suddenly realizes, I'm actually in the process of dying. I feel like I'm dying. I feel like I'm choking or suffocating. Because in the Bible, I think it's written, isn't it, that he said, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," and then he appeared to give up the ghost. Presumably he sighed loudly, and then he fell unconscious.
Yeah. So, I mean, what does that tell you about his frame of mind? And do you think he understood what was going to happen?
No, I don't think
in its details?
No, absolutely not. I don't think he did. I think he was simply... it said, for example, that he said, "I'll be raised from the dead." And Christians quote this a lot. But actually, if you read it carefully, the Hebrew, the Greek, it says, "I'll be raised from the place of the dead." Right? Which is a key difference, actually. And so this is obviously something that God had informed him of, but he had no idea how it was going to happen.
Right.
Right? Had absolutely no clue. And that's how God works, because at the end of the day, God... That's what, in fact, makes it an extraordinary event, that the person who actually went through it was himself, had no hand in saving himself.
Yeah.
And that was one of the great things about, I think, one of the great honorable things about Jesus' entire crucifixion ordeal is he goes through the courts, he stays silent pretty much. He doesn't say anything, except when people make specific accusations against him of in relation to his claims, does he reply to them. But in general, it says that he stayed silent throughout all of his things, because he wasn't depending on his own eloquence to defend himself. He was depending solely on God.
True. He had complete faith in God.
He had complete faith in God. God has told me I will be raised from the place of the dead, that this will be a sign of Jonah. He knew what the sign of Jonah was.
Yeah.
For heaven's sake. So he knew it was survival.
Yeah.
Which is why then the night before, he's like, well, this is the night before now. This is getting a bit close.
Yeah.
And then he gets whipped and beaten, and then he gets put on the cross. And then right at the point where he feels like he's choking and losing consciousness, it's at that point that he expresses, I thought it would have been over by now.
Yeah. And there's that
I thought God would have saved me by now.
Yeah, and then there must be that fear that, God, don't, you have sent me, so don't make circumstances which cause me to
No, I don't
look
think
like
that's what his fear was. I think his fear, why he said, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," he's not afraid of death. He's a prophet of God. He has no fear of death. The only thing he fears is God's displeasure. And so when he feels that that he's choking, he's losing consciousness, his fear is, what did I do wrong? Did I do something to displease God?
Similar to Jonah.
Exactly the same as Jonah. Exactly the same as Jonah. Jonah was in the belly of the whale. The Quran, what does it teach us? It says, La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu min al-zalimin. Holy art thou, indeed I have been of the wrongdoers. So it's a point of repentance, isn't it? So I think that's what was going through Jesus' mind when he said, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," that have I displeased you, O God, that you have not yet saved me, and that you're permitting me to die in my mission to die.
I mean, even if one doesn't, accept maybe our specific interpretations of it, at the end of the day, this is not a man who thinks that everything's going to plan. He's praying all night in the Garden of Gethsemane, as you said. He's, rebuking his disciples, telling them to get up, keep praying.
Yeah, 3 times.
Yeah, and then he's saying this on the cross. So then what happens?
Well, the other interesting thing was that even his disciples, it was quite obvious they didn't know what was going to happen either.
Yeah.
So there was the incident with Peter where he denied Jesus. This is according to the Bible. And other instances where many of his disciples fled at the time of the crucifixion.
Yeah.
So again, they weren't...
it says they all fled.
They all fled, yeah. And I guess that tells us two things. Firstly, that there was almost nobody there, so they couldn't really know for sure that he was dead. And secondly, that... Again, if it was some kind of great event that he would die and come back to life, then they would have a bit more resilience about them, and they would have kind of stayed there and been...
Said, okay, he's dead. It's okay, guys.
Yeah.
He told us this would happen. That's it's exactly how it happened. Now we're going to wait for the coming back to life. Okay?
Yeah.
So again, I think that also gives us the indication that perhaps things weren't going to plan in their eyes, and they were worried that Jesus would die at that point.
Okay.
So it was the time of the Sabbath, and
the Friday evening was starting.
Yes, because of that, both Jesus and the two thieves next to him had to be taken down from the cross because it was their custom that they wouldn't keep people on the cross during the Sabbath period, which actually meant that he was only on the cross for a few hours. I think it perhaps 2 or 3 or 4 hours.
3 to 6 at most.
Because the sun was darkened, it says. That actually the Sabbath, they feared it would start. And that sun going in, the clouds, would be the beginning of the Sabbath, even though it was 4 hours earlier or so.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's only up there for a few hours.
Yes.
Okay.
And crucifixion is not something typically that actually kills people within a few hours. It's meant to be a prolonged death. I think the ultimate cause of death is meant to be starvation after like 24, 48 hours. And there are accounts through historians like Josephus who talk about people being crucified for a really long period of time and then dying after a lot of hours.
Yeah, can I just read that out? So he says, this is the life of Josephus Flavius, who's the famous historian, one of the famous historians of that era, who's a Pharisee himself, wasn't he?
Yeah. Sadducee.
He's a Jewish priest.
Yeah.
I saw many captives crucified and remembered 3 of them as my former acquaintance. I was very sorry at this in my mind and went with tears in my eyes to Titus and told him of them. So he immediately commanded them to be taken down and to have the greatest care taken of them in order to their recovery. Yet 2 of them died under the physician's hands while the 3rd recovered. So he had 3 former acquaintances who were crucified, 2 died, 1 recovered. And you're right, like, starvation, if you, because it's
exposure, dehydration.
Yeah, probably sepsis if there's infection.
They even had dogs and things that they would have there.
So it's a slow cause of death.
Yeah.
But even then, I mean, if this person, if people do survive, then after 3 to 6 hours, young 30-year-old man or so, presumably, why would he have died so quickly?
Exactly.
The most objective thing is that the 2, maybe you're about to say this, the 2 thieves who were with him hadn't died.
Yes. So if the 2 people next to Jesus also hadn't died, just from that alone, the probability is probably Jesus didn't die either.
Yeah.
But he may have done. And so what happened was the Roman soldiers who saw that Jesus looked close to death or he looked dead, they stabbed him in the side with a spear. And again, this is in the Gospel of John, and it said that blood and water came gushing out. Do you want to talk about what that means?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think just before that, getting to that, if we recall, just going through the sequence, there's the 2 thieves who are alive.
Yeah.
And they see that they're alive, and so they break their legs
yes,
to hasten their death.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
And then they come to Jesus, and it says they see that he's dead.
Yeah.
Because he said, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. He's slumped unconscious. He looks dead.
Yeah.
Okay? So they don't break his legs.
Yeah.
Okay? And then they do what you've just mentioned, right? Which I think is very important because the sequence is, he's dead. We're not going to break his legs because we're not going to break somebody's legs if they're dead. Yeah. Because he's already dead. Because the point of breaking the legs was to hasten death. Because I understand they couldn't maintain their own weight. You get big femoral fractures, probably bleed out into your internal circulation, or you develop pulmonary emboli, or we're thinking about too much about this, but basically I think you can't support your own weight on the ledge that they provide, and so you basically die of various more trauma.
Okay. And then they pierce his side, and as the mirror said, blood and water rushed and gushed out. Now we are all 3 doctors, but we're psychiatrists. You're the IT doctor. Can you tell us a bit more about what that could have been and what the significance of blood and water rushing, gushing out?
Well, I think the key thing is just to ask yourself, why are they doing this? This is what I was trying to get at.
Yeah.
They already think he's dead. That's why they don't break his legs.
Yeah.
They then pierce his side. So why are they actually stabbing him with the spear? They're actually doing it because it's a test to see if he's alive.
Yeah.
Okay? Because remember, they think he's dead. That's why they don't break his legs. And now they're just checking if he is dead.
Yeah.
And so they're doing a simple... These aren't complicated individuals. This isn't some...
They weren't ITU doctors.
They weren't ITU doctors. They weren't trying to apply BIS monitoring to assess their degree of consciousness. They're just stabbing him with a spear. They're Roman soldiers. It's dark. There's apparently a hurricane coming in. Wind is howling. Okay, there's a storm. There's been an earthquake. Yeah. They're probably worried about their families back home, as Mirza Ghulam Ahmad explains in the book. They want to check if he's dead to get him down or not and get this thing sorted. Okay, so they cut him with a spear.
Yeah,
and he elicits no response.
Yeah,
and so they're like, right, he's dead.
Yeah,
but the person who is documenting the actual events, the author of John, who we can talk about at a different time. Controversial, don't think he's a disciple.
Yeah.
He actually says blood and water gushed out. Now, everybody knows, you don't have to be a doctor to know this. Blood doesn't gush out of a dead body. Okay. Blood doesn't gush out of a dead body. In fact, you die within a very short period of time, blood clots.
Really?
I mean, minutes. Yeah. Less than minutes.
I mean, every doctor will have the experience of this. When you take it into a syringe, not into the tubes, you take blood into the syringe and you leave it for like 2-3 minutes, it clots off and you can't get it into the actual...
not even 2-3 minutes. It is an unheparinized syringe. Yeah. It'll be a minute.
Yeah.
And that blood will no longer... It will congeal. It will certainly not gush.
Yeah.
Gush indicates pressure. It doesn't even indicate lack of coagulation.
Yeah.
Where you cut somebody and blood flows.
Yeah.
Gush indicates a beating heart. Okay, it means you've struck an artery and you're gushing out.
Yeah.
Okay, or you've struck a big vein and it's coming out quite rapidly.
Right. Yeah, because he could have cut a vein there. Yeah. And what about the water?
Well, I mean, people. I'm in two minds about this. Some people say, "Oh, well, it was actually they hit his pleural cavity and that's pleural fluid that's come out."
Right.
It's possible. It's possible that...
What does that mean? What's pleural mean?
Pleural fluid is it's this white greyish fluid that's around your... It's actually like water, actually, it looks like. It's around your lungs and lubricates your lungs between the two layers of the lining of the lung to help facilitate expansion of the lung. There's basically a fluid there that's there. And it does accumulate when you're going through trauma. If you've been beaten the night before, you've had bone fractures and stuff.
Yeah.
He may have accumulated pleural effusions.
Accumulated fluid could have been there.
Yeah, and then they could have cut in, they could have come out, and the person looking at it, documenting this, could have said, oh, there's blood and there's water, there's two separate things.
Right.
Christians try to make out that the blood and water indicates separation between plasma and hemoglobin. But that's nonsense, because, you don't get separation of plasma and hemoglobin within minutes of dying, right? And it wouldn't gush out.
What about within hours?
I don't know about within hours, but it wouldn't gush out anyway.
Yeah, it wouldn't gush out.
How do you gush clotted hemoglobin? I mean...
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Even the plasma wouldn't gush out.
Yeah.
So the point that he saw the blood and water flowed out, it came out rapidly, that indicates either it's blood and pleural fluid, or, I think it's more likely, blood and water is probably just a descriptive term for a person's contents of their vessels, their blood.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. I mean, could it be that there's been bleeding into the pleural effusion or whatever it is, and then that comes out as blood?
Yeah, you could have had a hemothorax. I mean, it could be all kinds of things. I personally think what is most likely, if you're going to be like hypothesizing medically speaking, I think he actually had a pneumothorax.
Yeah.
I think he had a pneumothorax. And when he cried Eli Eli lama sabachthani, it says he gasped. Right. I think he actually had a pneumothorax, possibly a tension pneumothorax. We don't know. Right, because we weren't there. But he had a pneumothorax of some sort, which made him feel like he was suffocating, choking. He couldn't take any more air in.
Yeah.
And then when actually they cut him with a spear, God arranged it in such a way that they effectively decompressed his lung.
Okay, but would a Christian say, if he had a pneumothorax, he'd be dead?
No, people live with pneumothoraces all the time. I mean, that's no.
Yeah. So they treated him inadvertently.
Whatever it was, they didn't have... This is all speculative at this point. Yeah. We've just been speculating for the last 5 minutes. The key thing is that they thought he was dead. They didn't break his legs. They checked if he was dead. They did it through a pain test.
Yeah.
Through cutting up somebody and seeing if they respond. He didn't respond. They took him down, presuming he was dead.
And the salient...
But the salient point is that...
the salient point of all of that is that there was a blood supply. It wasn't coagulated. There was blood which was seen from a distance.
Yeah.
So clearly...
Yeah, the guy wasn't sitting up looking at his chest with a magnifying
yeah, it wasn't
glass.
like drops coming out. It was actually, there's blood and water coming out indicates that there is a circulation. However you interpret it. If he had been dead for even minutes, but let's say hours, you wouldn't have the description of blood from a distance coming out. It indicates pressure.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the salient point, exactly how, what exactly was happening, whether it's therapeutic. Suspect it was, as you've said. Because that would just seem kind of more in line with a divine plan.
It's just more elegant, isn't it? I like it.
Okay, so he's so they prod him. He still doesn't wake up. Is that possible? Do we think medically you're put through some pain?
Yeah.
And you don't still wake up? Is it possible to be in that kind of coma?
Yeah.
Okay, tell us a little bit about that.
There's nothing to say. I mean, everybody knows that. People faint and they go through trauma and they are unresponsive to pain. I mean, that's completely...
But when they see him breathing away if he's in a coma, because you still have your respiratory function to some degree?
Maybe that's why, at the end of the day, you do have your respiratory function, but the question is, was his breathing depressed?
Yep.
Did he have a new thorax? Did he have pleural effusions? Did he have consolidated lung? Did he have... there's lots of reasons why you can't really, at the end of the day, when somebody's standing up there and you're a non-medical Roman soldier...
2,000 years ago.
2,000 years ago. In the dark. The sun's been eclipsed. There's an earthquake. You're like...
Is this guy dead?
You yourself are like, oh my God, this man was special for all these things to happen at this time.
Yeah.
Right? Remember that as well. The Roman soldier said he admitted, or he confessed his truth, according to the Bible, when he saw all of these happenings. So he himself, he may have actually seen him who was alive. And he may have said, I don't care. Let's get this guy out. Let's get him back to the cave. Let's get him healed.
Okay, but at the very least, he's looking to do a pain test to see if he's still alive.
Correct.
He may have he would have had a respiratory function if he was alive, but it could have been depressed. And as you say, it wouldn't be that visible. Very easy. A Roman centurion, he's not doing he's not medically trained. He's just,
three doctors can declare somebody dead who's in modern day. I mean, I think we say a Roman soldier...
But I labour this point because I don't know if you've had this experience, but Christians often go back to, these are Roman centurions. They knew how to certify someone was death. They knew what death looked like. But I find that implausible. I mean, that they would always be 100% correct in this kind of situation.
I mean, what is a Roman centurion? It's an Italian kid who is roped into being a soldier. Well, yeah. I mean, the Roman Empire was big, but what I mean is, it's usually a young man. They haven't gone through medical training.
Yeah,
they're specialized in killing people. And
is he dead? Poke him. He doesn't rouse. Yeah, he's dead.
Yeah.
Okay. Fine.
And probably most of the time they're right.
Yeah.
But in this case, possibly not. And the other thing is, we're looking at the way that we're analyzing this is actually through Jesus' quotes himself.
Yeah.
And where it says, because another thing Christians say is, well, it says in the Bible that he died. But that's speculation. That's not, again, through objective tests. There was no stethoscopes. There was nothing like that. Even if there were, it might not be true. But we're actually looking at the sources of Jesus' words themselves.
Yeah. Repeated words.
We're not looking at other people claiming things.
Yes.
And that I think is absolutely correct. People say, well, St. Paul said he was the Son of God. It's like, that's a claim. That's not evidence.
Yeah.
That's a claim. That's part of the claim set.
And there's the events, and then there's the interpretation of the events. And saying Jesus died is an interpretation which the author has put in.
Yeah.
But we're looking at the same fact set that they present and drawing a different inference.
So what happens when he was taken down from the cross?
So he was taken down, and I think at that point, Pontius Pilate found out that he had been taken down and was actually told that, Jesus has died. And it was either he or his wife who was astonished that Jesus had died so soon.
He was astonished.
He was astonished, that Jesus had already died.
Yeah.
Which
it says he marveled that Jesus had already died.
Which again is indication that it's not expected after that period of time that he would already have died.
Now this is the guy, not the Roman centurion. This is the guy who knows how long it takes to crucify somebody to death, because he does it. It's part of his job.
So Pontius Pilate then releases Jesus' body to two men, Nicodemus, who was a doctor, and Joseph of Arimathea. And then what these two men did essentially is to apply aloes and healing ointments to the wounds of Jesus. And you also have to think, why would they have done that? What's the point of applying these aloes and healing remedies if somebody was already dead? And also, why would a doctor really need the body, at that point as well? So
they take him down, and where's he put?
I think he's put in the tomb at that point.
And what is the tomb?
The tomb is I don't know. It's
well, what is this spatially? What does it look like? I mean, people think about tomb, they think underground 6 foot down, don't they?
Yeah, it wasn't that. It was just like a little cave within the normal land, and there was a stone that was rolled across.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is interesting.
This is probably my favorite part of the article. Is you reference this? This is a huge issue, isn't it? Who moved the stone? I've got it on the screen with us. You say that there's a whole book written about this. So when you tell us about it,
there's a whole book which, I haven't read the book, but the title is "Who Moved the Stone," and it's a common thing that the proponents of Christianity raise.
The resurrection narrative.
Yeah, and they say, well, how is it possible that Jesus could have survived, because he would have had to move the stone, and the stone was like super heavy, and it's not possible for one man to move the stone. So it would have to be some kind of divine thing whereby he died and was ascended to heaven and came back and all these kind of things. But there's a quote in the Bible which describes how the stone was rolled across in the first place to cover the tomb. And it was quite clear that just one person could do it. I don't know if you've got that quote there.
I don't. I think it says Joseph actually did it. I think.
It was something like, Joseph rolled the stone to cover the tomb.
Right. So a dude moved the stone.
Yeah.
So another person can potentially move it away. Okay.
I think the purpose of the stone was not to create some kind of impenetrable prison. I think it was just to stop wild animals from entering the tomb. For the...
Okay, I've got it. So Matthew 27:59-60. So Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and placed it in his own new tomb that he had cut into the rock. Then he rolled a great stone across the entrance to the tomb and went away.
Okay.
But Joseph was a giant. So
little known fact.
No, taking it seriously, I mean, it's quite clear. It says that Joseph rolled the stone. So that's kind of does away with that argument, doesn't it? That Jesus couldn't have rolled the stone. Certainly, I think it would have been more difficult for him. He's just gone through an assassination attempt. He's been crucified. He's probably had broken ribs and things.
Yeah.
It probably wasn't a pleasant experience rolling that stone back.
But he probably did it when he was physically ready. So he stayed in the tomb for a period of time. So the whole of the Friday night, Saturday
Sunday
night, Sunday morning. And possibly when he was not in a coma anymore, he was a bit more physically fit.
Yeah.
Then he only needs to move the stone a tiny bit, presumably.
to get out.
Yeah, get some leverage around it and move it.
Yeah.
So can I just go to the ITU doctor again? What is the plausibility of someone being in coma for 1 or 2 days and then waking up and being in and then recovering to a degree of strength to move a rock?
A young man. It is plausible, but we have to know about the degree of his injuries at the end of the day and what he went through. If a person has had broken ribs, possibly a pneumothorax, and they're given time to heal, and those are the main injuries, for example. So superficial flesh wounds, broken ribs, and potentially a pneumothorax which has been decompressed and then reinflated. Okay, over time.
So that means lungs are basically normal now?
Yeah, well, they're practically getting back to normal, even if he has a small pneumothorax there. It's, the air gets absorbed, the healing occurs. I remember what they did was, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, it says in the Bible that they applied these healing herbs to his wounds. And the key thing is that the Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad points out in his book, is that we still have the ingredients and the recipe and the ointment that was applied to Jesus' wound. So it's been preserved in medical textbooks from thousands of years ago, and it appears in thousands of medieval medical textbooks. Exactly how it has 12 ingredients. It tells you how to mix it, how to produce it, and it is a fantastic treatment for wounds.
Yeah.
Okay, so it really helps and aids regeneration of wounds. It has aloes in it. It has myrrh in it. It has a bunch of different oils in it.
I mean, aloe vera isn't aloes, they're kind of common antiseptics, is my understanding.
Yeah, they are. So, I mean, if somebody applies all of these herbs and this kind of chunky ointment to somebody's wounds, one would hope that they do start to heal up. And then it applies a bandage over it.
Or at least they stop infection.
It stops infection, helps wound healing.
Yeah.
I think it's perfectly reasonable somebody 2 days later, after sleeping through that and recovering in a tomb, would be able to walk at the very least.
A 30-year-old.
A 30-year-old, a young, fit man with no previous comorbidities. Yeah, I think it's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah. Okay. So
but there are going to be Christian ITU doctors who are more senior to me who disagree with me potentially. But that's I don't think they would. They can't disagree on the basis.
What they say, it's impossible for a 30-year-old person to have.
No, it's not.
Mild to moderate trauma. Probably more mild in the in the totality
of what can happen.
Yeah, for over a few hours, and then
people have
rest for 2 days.
People at the end of the day, people
having been probably seen to by his friends, probably given some, left some water next to him, etc.
Yeah. I mean, people get rib fractures, superficial flesh wounds, pneumothoraces, and they're walking around as they have them, okay, and they're walking around for the next day or two after it.
Yeah.
So it's completely within the realms of reason that this person recovered for 2 days and then decided to walk out.
Okay. Yeah. So Sunday morning.
So he walks out of the tomb, and he sees some of his disciples, and the most famous incident is that of Thomas, who's known as Doubting Thomas in the Bible, because Thomas looks at Jesus and can't believe that he's alive. And Jesus says, I am alive, and he shows Thomas his wounds. And again, this is a kind of proof that Jesus didn't die and come back to life, but survived, because he's showing Thomas, look, I had this ordeal, and here are my wounds to prove that I had this ordeal.
Yeah.
But I survived the ordeal.
Yeah.
I feel like it would have been a more compelling story if he was completely pure and pristine with no wounds at all. You might then be inclined to believe, oh, maybe then he, went up to heaven and God does some secret thing and then he comes back. But the fact that he shows him his
the narrative.
The fact that he shows him his wounds kind of shows, look, I've survived this ordeal. The fact that Thomas is so surprised demonstrates that, again, it wasn't this plan that they knew all along, that Jesus would die and come back to life. And then slowly, more of his disciples start kind of figuring this out, start seeing Jesus, and start, being astonished that he's survived this ordeal.
Okay, so we have another quote here. Do you want to read that out?
Yeah, sure. So it's and after 8 days, his disciples were again inside, and Thomas with them. Jesus came, the doors being shut, and stood in their midst, and said, "Peace to you." Then he said to Thomas, reach your finger here. Oh, well, the key thing is that Thomas says beforehand, so other disciples have seen him, and they say, we have seen the Lord.
Yeah.
So Thomas said to them, unless I see in his hands the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. And then after 8 days, Jesus comes to them and says, peace to you. Assalamu alaikum. Then he said to Thomas, reach your finger here and look at my hands, and reach your hand here and put it into my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing. And Thomas answered and said to him, my Lord and my God. Right? Yeah. Now, how did he do that? He probably said, my Lord, my God. We don't know.
Yeah.
I really like the bit in Luke, though. I want to read to you.
Well, also I would say the Hebrew, these things are the same words used for master.
Correct. Mola. Yeah. This is absolutely same in Arabic. People use Mola for their religious leaders.
Yeah.
When it means Lord. So, this is very similar to in Luke. It says, now in these things, Jesus, this is Luke chapter 24, verse 36. Jesus himself stood in the midst of them and said to them, peace to you. But they were terrified and frightened and supposed they had seen a spirit. So the key question arises, what is a spirit? A spirit is the being of a person after death. By definition.
Yeah.
It's the being of a person after death. Okay? And he said to them, why are you troubled, and why do doubts arise in your hearts? Behold my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Handle me and see. For a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see I have. When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. But while they still did not believe for joy and marveled, he said to them, do you have any food here? So they give him a piece of broiled fish and some honeycomb. So, I mean, this is... Can you comment to that, please?
How do you compare that between the death and resurrection hypothesis and the survival hypothesis?
I think that it shows that, firstly, his disciples were absolutely astonished, showing that it wasn't some kind of grand plan. Yeah. Jesus says, why are you surprised? Which probably means, look, you've heard me talk about the sign of Jonah.
Yeah,
you've heard me talk about these prophecies that I'm going to, have this ordeal and then be revived from it. So why are you doubting that? You're kind of, doubting God in that sense, but this is what's happened. And the fact that he then asks for food, perhaps also...
And he explicitly says he asked for food because they still did not believe.
Yeah, so maybe they thought, okay, he's a spirit, or we're hallucinating or something like that. But he's telling them, look, I'm an ordinary man and I need food just like you do. And, I've had this bad situation and I'm probably still a bit dehydrated and probably still not that well. And I need some food to strengthen me up again.
So basically he's saying I'm the same body.
Yes.
But, I'm a physical body and I need physical substance. So, yeah, I think you're absolutely right as well. What you said about, they were clearly shocked which again goes to the fact that he could not have been spending the last 3 years before of the ministry saying, at some point I'm going to die and come back to life.
Yeah.
Because they're shocked that to actually see him again. They, like Jesus, probably didn't quite understand how the sign of Jonah was going to play out. They think he died. They're in shock. They're in confusion. And then they see him again and they can't believe it. And then Jesus proves it to him. What a magnificent sign. But we can talk about that in a bit. But I mean, just now, it's just absolutely incredible sign.
It is.
Of this truth. So he has proved the sign of Jonah, and yet the Christians would deny Jesus this sign.
I know. That's
they would deny
tragedy
Jesus this
of
sign
this,
and
actually.
say, instead, what happened was he died. He went to hell.
I know.
He went to hell for the better part of a weekend to atone for all of the sins of humanity, and then came back. I mean, which is more in line with a divine way of doing things anyway. But okay, so
well, no, not just a divine way of doing things. Which one is more reasonable and rational?
Yeah.
I think
even on ordinary
you don't need to invoke great spiritual powers to understand this matter. It's a simple thing.
Yeah. All right, so that's the kind of crucifixion narrative. Those are the 3 days. And then after the 3 days, he is seen by hundreds of people and eventually just is not seen again, right? And then we have many, many generations later, they put in that he ascended to heaven, I think at the end of Luke.
Yeah, 200 years, 250 years later.
So, but basically he disappears and the gospel ends. Okay, we could talk a bit about that in a minute. But having gone through the crucifixion events, let's see, as you did, which hypothesis can explain it better. So why don't you compare the two hypotheses, resurrection versus survival?
Okay, so from a spiritual perspective, if we compare from what the Bible actually says, the survival hypothesis explains the past prophecies that Jesus actually made.
Yeah. For
example, the sign of Jonah. For example, the fact that he needed to go and preach to numerous different tribes, not just the 1 or 2 that were in the area at the time.
Yeah.
And the resurrection hypothesis doesn't address those prophecies, and
contradicts them, in fact.
Contradicts them. So it'd have to say that actually he got those prophecies wrong, And then the next aspect is that the actual scientific aspect of it is better explained by the survival hypothesis.
Yeah.
Firstly, because dying and coming back to life is the one thing that we know is impossible.
Yeah.
Like nobody today would ever contemplate that happening.
Yeah.
And then even the objective things like the length of time he was on the cross, which was only a few hours, not enough time for somebody to die.
Yeah.
The fact that the thieves next to him were still alive. Yeah. The fact that Pontius Pilate was astonished that he had died so early.
And that was possibly because of the fact that God told his wife in a dream that he was actually innocent.
But we're going to talk about the idea of the whole thing in a moment.
And the fact that Jesus, peace be upon him, was stabbed in the side with a spear and blood and water came gushing out, which is a sign of a beating heart.
Yeah.
So all of those things which are contained within the Bible, so we're not using any other scripture, we're using the New Testament itself, the Gospels.
Yeah.
They are best explained, those events, by the survival hypothesis more than the resurrection hypothesis. And the last one in the table is that it appeals to known causes rather than unknown causes. So as we've discussed, there have been many instances of people having thought to be dead, actually being alive, and there's no instances in history of somebody being dead and coming back to life.
And that's kind of the key thing that ID proponents emphasize with respect to evolution. I've noticed Stephen Mayer make this point time and time again, that you have to explain you have to explain observations by phenomena that are in operation currently, and that have been witnessed to explain those observations in other circumstances.
Yeah.
Okay. So he says, well, the only time you get a complex piece of machinery, like, for example, DNA, like, for example, the tRNA machinery, like, for example, the single-cell organism, right? You only get a complex piece of machinery like that, which is akin in complexity to... much greater in complexity to a car or a building or anything like that.
Yeah.
You only see that level of complexity when it's designed by a mind. And he says that the observation is only explained by causes that are intelligent in nature.
Yeah.
So...
And we still have intelligent causes because we are intelligent.
Because we are intelligent. We engineer things all the time. So we know what intelligent causes look like. And so I guess what you're saying here is that all of these facts, they are all explained by the only thing that can explain them, which is known to produce these effects, is the survival hypothesis.
Yeah. You have to appeal to special causes, to unknown things, to one-offs of death and resurrection.
Which contradict and create logical inherent contradictions.
And disprove Jesus' truth.
Right.
And it's also puzzling why God would expect religious people to believe in an event like this that's completely unknown, unwitnessed, impossible in modern time. Why God would expect people to have to believe in that as the central tenet of their faith.
Yeah.
I think it would be much more reasonable for God to say, look, reflect upon nature, reflect upon how the universe is created, upon the known causes, and then base your belief on that rather than on something that's completely...
So utilize the faculties I've given you in a sound and valid way rather than denying them.
Yes.
So, I mean, a lot of Christians will probably say, what about this quote? What about this quote with the Ascension quote, or the different things, the Great Commission quote, going forth unto all nations? And I guess what we'd say to that is, we're not building our case off any one little snippet of one gospel. What we're saying is, look at the overall narrative and look what Jesus himself said.
Look at the events, not the statements even.
That's what I mean. Look at the overall events.
Actions.
Yeah, well, look what happened, which we all agree happened. And look at what Jesus said repeatedly, what was the thrust of his message, and see which hypothesis lines up with the others. And if there are statements, the odd statement here or there, which contradicts the bulk of the narrative, you exclude that odd statement as an outlier, as something which, may have been interpolated. Maybe we've mistranslated it, maybe we've misunderstood it, because we know for a fact the Gospels were certainly interpolated, but it's harder to interpolate events.
Yeah.
It's much easier to put in narration. But actually, when you have all the Gospels agreeing, as well as other extra biblical sources, that the crucifixion happened in this way, and we know that Jesus said all these things about, like you said, the tribes of Israel thing and the sign of Jonah. This narrative, the survival hypothesis, makes a lot of sense. But I want to come to, I think, maybe the last part of our program, which is the intelligent design of all of it, right? Because the first part, what we've been talking about, is what does inference to the best explanation tell us, which is kind of used in the ID framework. But the essence of ID is basically arranging elements in a certain order to achieve a certain purpose. So let's have a brief discussion about that. How did, if God, and let's say we now accept the survival hypothesis as we do, how did God engineer this event to happen in the way that it did so that Jesus would survive? What would you say was maybe the first thing, or one of the earliest things that happened?
I think it's a lot of what we've discussed. So I think it's a lot of the fact that he told Jesus, presumably through revelation, that this big event's going to happen, but it will be like the sign of Jonah.
Yeah, good point.
And then I think it was that all of these events just happened together and coincided. So Pontius Pilate's wife had a dream, in which she was quite disturbed by, I think.
Yeah.
And she told Pontius Pilate, don't have anything to do with this man, or don't condemn this man.
Yeah.
But Pontius Pilate did, because that was the consensus of the crowd at the time.
Well, he didn't condemn him.
No, but he gave the people a choice, didn't he, of Jesus or Barabbas as the person to crucify.
Well, he gave them a choice which he thought they can't possibly get this choice wrong.
Yeah.
Okay.
He gave them the choice between a known, in today's parlance, terrorist.
Yeah.
Okay. And a person who was a peace-loving man.
Mm.
And he thought there's no way that they're going to choose the terrorist.
Yeah.
And they did.
So God engineered it firstly by telling people like Jesus, like Pontius Pilate's wife, giving them some kind of revelation.
Yeah.
And then also engineering all the specific events, as we've talked about. So things like potentially Jesus being stabbed in the side by the spear as a therapeutic mechanism to keep him alive. The fact that he happened to be crucified on the Friday, which meant that he had to be taken down after a few hours only.
So can we just pause and elaborate on that? So the timing, I think, is really important. Can you maybe come in a bit more on the timing?
Well, yeah, it says he was put on the cross at the 6th hour, doesn't it?
Okay.
I think that's
Possibly,
what it says.
Yeah.
And he was taken down at the 9th hour.
But was the Friday Well,
the Friday is important because there was a storm and an eclipse.
Yeah.
So the sun was obscured, and the Sabbath begins actually on a Friday night.
So Pilate arranged for him to be put up on the day.
Maybe he did it on purpose.
Sabbath.
Maybe it was just how it turned out. But he got him up on the Friday at the 6th hour, which is 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and he was taken down at the 9th hour, which is 3 o'clock in the afternoon, from my understanding. And the reason he was taken down early was because there was a storm, and the sun was eclipsed.
Right.
And the Sabbath begins at sunset.
Yeah.
On the Friday.
Yeah.
So when the sun was obscured, they thought, has the Sabbath actually begun early, therefore, in God's eyes?
Yeah.
So we just need to take him down as soon as possible.
Okay.
And that's what then hastened them to break the legs of the thieves, to hasten their death, as it says in the Bible.
Yeah.
And then to assess if Jesus is dead.
And that's what you were saying then about the they do the spear and that could be therapeutic. So what when you continue from there, if that's all right.
Yeah. So then after that, God arranged it such that Jesus was then put into the hands of a doctor.
Yeah.
Who then helped to alleviate his wounds, prevent infections.
Yeah.
And enable him to make quite a quick recovery as well.
Yeah.
And who happened to have a new sepulchre.
Yeah. So I think a lot of these events were just coordinated and timed, and the reason we're talking about intelligent design is because, again, through just blind chance, all these things to happen, it's quite unlikely that Jesus would be saved through all these mechanisms.
Yeah.
And the much more likely outcome should have been that Jesus had somehow died or not survived the actual event.
Yeah.
But because of the way it was engineered and the way that it was done, it appears like there was an intelligent mind, i.e. God, that actually engineered the whole process.
Well, who would have thought that a whale would swallow a person?
Yeah.
When they're drowning in the sea. It's the same kind of level of, oh, wow, that's extraordinary.
Yeah.
Kind of, feeling.
And this is what miracles really are, aren't they? They're not, according to the Islamic understanding, they're not events that are anti-scientific, that it's impossible for a rational person to understand.
Yeah.
But what they are is something that is a great coincidence, or something that happens in a way that seems impossible but actually does happen that way.
Yeah.
Like, for example, when Moses parted the Red Sea, it wasn't the fact that his stick parted the Red Sea, it was the fact that it happened to be at that time that the tide went a certain way and Moses and his people were allowed to go through.
Yeah.
And then the Pharaoh and his people happened to run through the water at a time when the tide was coming back, and then they drowned. Yeah. So it's timing, it's coincidence, it's these kind of things
but it's
that make
not
a
just
miracle.
timing and coincidence, it's timing and coincidence in support of the claimant to prophethood and of God's support.
So the miracle isn't the breakage of a law of nature, it's
implementation.
God using a law of nature at the right time, in the right place, for a prophet of his.
In an extraordinary way that supports the religious claim.
Yeah. It's purposeful.
Yes.
And purpose indicates mind.
Yeah.
Right. So, I think, the way you've laid it out has been very illuminating. And I think for me, it's very significant because I sense, and I can't speak for any actual ID advocates of the well-known ones, I don't know. But I think in general, a lot of Christians struggle reconciling reason and their faith, because the events of the crucifixion, as we talked about, these are unwitnessed, unique events that don't quite make sense in terms of they certainly contradict Jesus' own words, but it's a unique, exceptional thing, and requires, in order to justify it, you also have to believe that Jesus was God and God died and came back to life, etc. And you have to bring Trinity into it. It's all very difficult to understand. And yet what Christians really love, the reason I propose, the reason why most Christians are Christians, is because the moral teachings of Jesus. It's because the moral purity of Jesus, because of the way that he taught us to live our life. They want to keep that moral purity, but they are taught that in order to have that, they also have to accept all of these doctrines. So then they kind of accept the doctrines, often on sort of blind faith, don't think about it, just accept it, in order to have this, in order to have the moral teachings.
Yeah.
But what we're saying is that you can have your moral teachings. You can have your cake and eat it too. You can have the moral teachings of Jesus, and you can keep the belief in the truth of Jesus if you accept the survival hypothesis rather than the death and resurrection hypothesis. In fact, knowing what you now do about what Jesus said about what would be his major signs, it is the only way that you can keep to Jesus being a true man or prophet of God, or whatever you believe in him. It's the only way that he can actually be accepted as true, because he had to display the sign of Jonah, and he did display the sign of Jonah, and we can also accept his moral teachings. And especially in the West, it enables us to keep our reason and not have to believe kind of anti-rational things. So it's an enormously important illumination from the founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. We believe it was divinely revealed upon him. He wrote in that book, Jesus in India, seminal work, in which he put forward so much evidence of this hypothesis. And there's so much we haven't talked about.
The key thing I think we haven't talked about is what's the consequence of this Christian doctrine. If Jesus didn't die on the cross for the sins of mankind, then what does that mean? It means exactly what he himself said, that every man shall bear his own cross.
Yeah.
Right? That there is no atonement that, you will be judged on your merits by God after death. It's not that somebody else has died for all your sins. So I think that this actually is a very important hypothesis. Not hypothesis. I think it's it's an open closed book when it's been laid out as excellently as it has.
Yeah.
That in actual fact, the atonement theory of Saint Paul, which he put forward in Romans, Galatians, etc.,
which he said was revealed to him, in fact.
Which he said was revealed to him, and he claimed to be a prophet on that basis in some sense. That actually, in actual fact, it is a hoax, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
It is a falsehood.
Yeah.
And that Christians should return to the original teachings of Jesus, which is ultimately one of following revealed law, not of abolition of the
Jewish law.
The Jewish law, right? Or if they wish, any other law. For example, we Muslims believe that the Islamic law has come to as a superseding of all other laws from God in the sense of religious teachings, not secular laws, not laws of the government, but moral laws and spiritual laws.
Okay, so is there anything else that you wanted to
No, I
mention
think I just want to emphasize that point at the end, that this has a profound impact on the conception of God and the doctrines of Christianity.
So I want to just finish and close on one last area, which we will touch on. We won't be able to fully do it in this video, I'm afraid, but a lot of Christians will say, okay, let's say we accept the survival hypothesis. He fulfilled the sign of Jonah. He didn't die. He survived the crucifixion. He was then seen alive. But then where did he go? Shouldn't we be seeing him? What happened? Did he just suddenly die of a heart attack 8 weeks later? What happened? How can we accept that Jesus survived and didn't ascend to heaven unless we have some kind of alternative explanation there? Can you talk to that bit?
So it's quite a big topic, but again, the theory or the theory outlined by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, again under divine guidance, he claimed revelation, and God had told him some of these aspects, which is that Jesus migrated post crucifixion to the other tribes of Israel. So he went further east to places like Afghanistan and India, and he preached to the people there, and actually lived quite a long life, up to 120 years old. And his grave has been found in a place called Srinagar, which is in Kashmir. And it bears the name of a person called Yus Asaf, which translates as Jesus the shepherd, or something along those lines. And there's historical evidence of this man who goes and preaches the same kind of parables that Jesus preached and gave the same kind of messages and teachings. And so
was widely accepted.
And so the theory is that this man, Yus Asaf, is the same man as Jesus, peace be upon him himself, who post-migration went and fulfilled his mission, which is to preach to those people in the other tribes of Israel.
And the best proof of this I've come across is in Hindu scriptures. So in Hindu scriptures, in Bhavisya Mahapurana, which is one of the Puranas, thought to have been written at the end of the 1st century AD, or about that time. It recounts a king of Kashmir in the Himalayas, in the mountains, walking along with his retinue, and coming across a fair-skinned man who appears to be a foreigner from the West. And he says to him, "Tell me, who are you?" He says, "I am Isha Masih. I am Jesus the Messiah." He says, I call myself the Son of God. I was born of a virgin. I was persecuted in the West. Tell me if any of this rings a bell, by the way. I was persecuted in the West, where I fled from injustice and persecution, and I've come here. Right? And he says, "What is your religion?" He says, "My religion is love, truth, and purity of the heart." Okay, which is a very nice summary, I think, of Jesus' message. And
was he traveling with anybody?
And he was traveling with people, And, even close to that area, we have another place. We have a place called, a town called Murree, which is a town on the border between Pakistan and India, which is named after an ancient grave site in the area, which is known as the grave site of Mother Mary. Right? And we have this, very... I don't know how to describe it other than, to my mind at least, it's absurd, is the Catholic doctrine of Assumption. Right? So there's the doctrine of Assumption, and they have the Feast of the Assumption every year, which is the date on which they assume they assume that Mother Mary must have ascended to heaven with Jesus because she also disappeared about the same time.
Yeah.
Now that should tell you something.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we see a person appearing in the East about the same time in other religious scriptures with the unique characteristics of Jesus, we find a tomb bearing his name, we find a tomb bearing the name of his mother.
Yeah.
Right? And his tomb, his own tomb that's said to be that of Jesus's, of Yusuf, is buried in the Jewish way, is buried in an east-west direction, not north-south as per Muslims. Right? It's even got a sarcophagal imprint of his feet and the marks of crucifixion on his feet.
And we can link
to
the video which shows that.
Yeah, we can link all that. But I mean, I think it becomes there's a heck of a lot of evidence.
Yeah. I mean, the people around there, there's a famous study, is one called Among the Dervishes, another Jesus lived in India, which documents that the people of that area in Kashmir call themselves Muslim Christians, and they believe that Jesus, came here and taught there, and that's their tradition. People will say, how can it be that someone traveled to Kashmir? Isn't India really far? What would be your response to that?
It's quite far.
The classic quip of our fourth Khalifa was, heaven is definitely further. You have to make a choice. Is it going to be India or the seventh heaven? Where are you going to go? Actually, the modern researchers hypothesized that actually it wasn't that hard at all.
Yeah.
Because you could quite easily take a boat on the Silk Road.
Right.
And the Silk Roads were very active, and you could actually travel by boat at least to India very simply.
Yeah.
But the Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, peace be upon him, he himself believed, and he set out the evidence in his book for Jesus' travels overland,
right,
through Iran, Afghanistan, and into what's now northern Pakistan and northern India.
And in Muslim traditions, he's actually known as the wandering prophet,
correct,
the traveling prophet.
Yeah,
and we're not saying he went there in a week, but he went there over time to gather his lost tribes. I mean, he's shown the great sign of his truth, and then he continues, supported by God, to gather his flock. And I'm almost heartbroken for the Christians, because in my mind, this is the best sign of God's existence in the entire Bible.
Yeah, it is.
In terms of actual documentation and how reliable the events are, with this interpretation, this is the best argument for God's existence, bar none. I can't see anything else. Even in the Old Testament, there are obviously signs, but the reliability diminishes as we go further back in time, and the contradictory nature of the narratives. So Christians are denying themselves one of the best arguments that they can put forth for the existence of God, and they are instead opting for a narrative that requires them to believe that Jesus is a man but God, and that he died and went to hell for 2 days and then came back, etc., etc. Why not accept something which is in line with Jesus' own words, which confirms his truth, which fully aligns with the Old Testament, and which unites the Jews in terms of the Jewish scripture with the New Testament, and illuminates our whole understanding of religious history.
And ultimately is a fantastic proof of Jesus' truth to the Jews.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole point of putting Jesus on the cross was, an accursed person is to die on the wood. You're right. And that's why Paul said, Jesus became accursed for us by his death on the cross.
Yeah.
So if you can say he survived, then you say, well, then he was actually from God. He was the Messiah of the Jews. Mm-hmm. All you Jews should accept Jesus. Mm-hmm. You should accept the teachings that he brought. You should accept the message that he came with. Mm-hmm. The problem is that Christians are wedded not to Jesus, in the sense that they're wedded from the doctrinal standpoint. They're wedded to St. Paul.
Yeah. And, we have an article on our website about St. Paul, which I'll link below, about our views on him, which is an entirely different topic. Any last words?
No, I think it's just a very beautiful explanation, this survival hypothesis, and it just ties together everything. And I think not only for Christians, but also for people who have left Christianity in the West because of concerns about irrationality or being illogical, this hypothesis kind of can be a way back for them, and can kind of make people see that, look, religion doesn't have to be about ascending to heaven physically or dying and coming back to life. Actually, religion is rational, and religion is something that can be believed in with your scientific mind as well.
Certainly concur with rational religion. Thank you very much. Anything you want to say? Okay, well, we'll just stop it there.
Peace be upon you. Thanks for watching that video. I'm Razik, I'm the editor of this channel, and I hope you liked the video. And if you did, please leave a like and a comment. We love to encourage the discussion that we get under these videos. They're very interesting. And if you'd like to see more of this kind of content, then please subscribe, and we'll do our best to give you more of this kind of stuff. Thank you.